We kick off the story with a kid named Lloyd being mercilessly kicked out of his group of adventurers. And it's like this, my dudes, you might be wondering how we got here. So, to explain that, let's go back in time. And there, we see little Lloyd, jaw dropped, while a woman conjures fire in the palm of her hand. She tells him to do the same, or else he'll go without dinner. And with that, the young man tries his best to meet her expectations until sometime later, he comes back to the same woman, mentioning that constant dripping wears away a stone. In other words, he managed to conjure fire in his hand. And when he actually manages to produce flames, his tutor offers a rare compliment. But before he can enjoy the moment, she puts out his fire and sends a spell dozens of times stronger, smoking the poor dude out. According to her, he still has a long way to go. What a caring teacher. The next day, Lloyd stomps the ground hard, trying to make a new technique work. When nothing happens, his instructor decides to show him how it's done and rubs her foot, making water appear. Then, the persistent Lloyd copies her and manages to dampen the dirt too. However, as soon as he's praised again, Miss Faith in the Crazy Ones immediately bombards the guy with water, showing him how real magic works. On another day, the little guy almost bursts a vein and his underwear trying to manipulate the wind. And the teacher? Well, she sends him flying with a single breath. Is it over? Calm down, there's more. Because when snow covers the land, Lloyd decides it's time to practice with this new element, and in a proud and innocent way, he shows his master a snowman he made that looks just like her. And not one to break tradition, she uses the very same snowman to grab him and drop him from a considerable height, after magically making the snowman enormous. After digging himself out from under the pile of snow, Lloyd realizes he needs more power and vows to work even harder. Then there's the day his master is way past tipsy, after a few too many bottles. Nursing a monstrous hangover, she hears her apprentice ask if she's okay. She admits she's not at all. Lloyd, undeterred, places a hand on her forehead and prepares a healing spell. Feeling a bit better, the woman admits the boy's gotten pretty good at healing and gives him a rare, affectionate hug, at which our little protag is proud to have helped her. But there's no time to celebrate, she's already recovered and ready to get back to magic training. With that, the days fly by, and the young mage's training never lets up. On a certain night, the teacher seems troubled as she stares at a book in a box, and our protag then comes by and says dinner is ready, and the woman accidentally drops the book. Lloyd picks it up to hand it back, but as he does, he's struck by a magical reaction that almost fries the kid's processor. Realizing what happened, his master sees that he has the potential to become a chosen one too, so if that's his destiny, she swears she won't let him make the same mistakes she did by becoming overconfident with his skills. At that, she kisses the boy's forehead, leaving a blue mark behind. The scene changes, and the next day, the instructor explains that a white mage is someone who uses magic for the benefit of others. And while she's talking, Lloyd regenerates a piece of fruit and earns a compliment, but his master immediately goes further, regenerating the whole tree and bringing it back to life with her healing magic. And this demonstration makes our protag express that his master is incredible. That night, she tells Lloyd that, according to what she's heard, some beastmen can use rare magic to control monsters. And Lloyd's curiosity is piqued by a mention of ancient magic in the book on the table, but the teacher's expression darkens, and she says he doesn't need to learn that it's just a type of magic that's been extinct for centuries. The next day, Lloyd conjures a staff, but his teacher thinks he's way too slow, then conjuring her own scepter and tripping the poor boy, making him fall. She explains that he needs to speed up and reminds him that, as inexperienced as he is, he must never get complacent with his training. Later, the two sit at the table to continue studying, and while he reads about the Magistone, his teacher explains that it's a crystallization of mana powerful enough to turn nearby things into other Magistones. And then the scene changes, and a few more days have passed. They went to a certain forest, and after arriving, the master takes off Lloyd's blindfold. With a wild beast lurking, the woman hands a knife to her apprentice and gives him the lowdown. His mission is to get home in a week. Basically, a fantasy version of Naked and Afraid, using only magic to survive. The moment she leaves him, Lloyd is attacked by a giant wolf. He runs, not caring if he looks like a coward. After escaping up a tree, he realizes he can't yet defeat monsters with a white mage's spells, so all he can do is keep running until he's strong enough to fight back. Looking around, he sees just how far from home he really is. At night, he regenerates a fruit to eat and hides in a cave. Drawing a magic circle on the ground, the young mage plans to tweak the design to channel more power and improve his skills. With the sunrise comes more hardship, as he has to cross a mountain, and this won't be an easy task. Night after night, he practices his magic circle, and also works on improving his detection magic, or else he could end up starving. And by combining two circles, he hopes to boost his running speed. One morning during his adventure, Lloyd accidentally steps on a branch and draws the attention of a hideous spider. And once again he bolts. And it's at this moment that he tests his newly improved speed circle, which actually works, allowing him to escape unharmed. Running flat out, Lloyd finally makes it back home but passes out before he can even knock on the door. His master soon finds him and welcomes her apprentice back. Then a few more days passed, and while tidying up a room, Lloyd, now with a noticeably more mature voice, stumbled upon a book that caught his eye. The cover was a painting of a city, and at that moment his master appeared, telling him to get back to cleaning, but he still asked to borrow the book. The next day, while Lloyd was sweeping, his master called him to help with a spell that could stop the aging process. At another time, she interrupted him while he was hanging laundry, asking for help with a healing spell. And while they were grubbing, the mage revealed she'd thought up a new enhancement magic. In other words, more work on the horizon. That night, when our protag was already begging for a break from exhaustion, his master mentioned she cast a spell on him so he wouldn't sleep for a week. That way, he wouldn't need to rest and could keep working, then offering him another potion to recover his vitality. And I confess, I'd love to have one of those so I wouldn't have to sleep and could pump out more videos for you guys. And after a long struggle, the moment of glory arrives, where he finally managed to get a moment to look at the book. The scene changes, and the next morning his master went to wake her student for more experiments, but his room was empty. She saw the book with the city on the cover and realized the connection. Meanwhile, he was on his way through the forest, heading straight for the city he saw on that book's cover. And once inside the walls, the mage wandered the plaza, dumbfounded, as he'd never seen so many people together. A man carrying boxes rushed past and cursed at Lloyd for being in the way, but all Lloyd could think was how amazing cities seemed. He traded his last coin for a loaf of bread, but just as he was about to eat, a gust of wind slapped a piece of paper against his face, while the person responsible vanished as soon as he saw his plan succeed, leaving Lloyd to read a flyer about adventurer recruitment. Sometime later, far from there, inside a shadowy dungeon, a group of warriors fought a cyclops, and our protagonist was among them, jaw dropped at the intensity of the brawl. The team's leader shouted for Sheena to cast a healing spell, while Lloyd slammed his staff to the ground and summoned a magic circle that spread across the whole battlefield. And with that, the whole team is now buffed and ready to finish the beast off. First, the archer fires an arrow straight into the monster's eye. The Cyclops retaliates with a punch, but the team's tank steps in, blocking the blow, surprised at how much lighter the impact felt. At this, the sorceress casts a binding spell, wrapping the monster's arms and legs, giving their leader the perfect chance to finish the job with a powerful sword strike. And after their victory, the tank stared intently at Lloyd. When the group returned to the city, the whole team was greeted with cheers for defeating the Cyclops, but Alan, the hero, was by far the most celebrated. Later, when it came time to split the mission rewards, Lloyd received a much smaller share than the others. At that moment, Alan explained that this was what a D-rank member got, and the mage didn't complain. And well, with that settled, the leader called for a toast, but Lloyd made it clear he wasn't much of a drinker and wandered away. The team's which grumbles about his attitude, while Alan comments that any white mage could have done Lloyd's job. After all, white mages are useless in battle and are just there for show. Nothing like the classic prejudice against the support class, a real shame. But even with these words worthy of a total doofus, the tank is still silent, observing our protagonist. Meanwhile, back at Lloyd's master's house, she was visited by a man named Will, the guy who threw the flyer at our protag, bringing the news that her apprentice had been recruited by the heroes. She was happy and says she owes him one now, since this way the boy would get real training, but she's still worried he might become overconfident. Will asked if her regrets still haunted her, making her uncomfortable, but she promised herself she wouldn't repeat the mistakes of the past. Then Will recalled how, back then, the demon lord sacrificed himself trying to steal that grimoire, taking many others down with him. And at a crucial moment, Sybil's ancient magic brought everyone the demon lord killed back to life at the cost of her own. And dudes, either I'm crazy or the plot twist just hit hard, because at this moment the scene really suggested that this Sybil is actually our protagonist, who got younger and lost his memories. Damn, did anyone else get that, or is it just the narrator's excitement? Anyway, the scene changes, and at dawn, back in the city, a vendor was promoting a book about Alan's group's adventures. According to him, long ago in ancient times, this world was created by the creator, and legend said that the trials of the heroes were left behind, the national treasures of the sacred nation, the sacred swords, and one of the 4 heroes chosen by these swords was Alan. That's why all the monsters threatening the city had been defeated, and now, Alan's name echoed throughout the entire kingdom. Speaking of the city's great celebrity, Alan stumbled drunkenly into a room where the team's tank was reading a book. Worried because lately the blows to her shield had felt odd, Alan, unconcerned, said he felt stronger than ever. The girl pointed out that he hadn't been training much lately, and Alan just shrugged, figuring there was no need, since he was naturally much stronger than anyone else. Meanwhile, by a stream, 2 soldiers stood guard until they were slaughtered by a giant creature. The next day, Alan was informed that the border guards had been killed. The messenger explained that the area was also a route for smugglers, so it was urgent to protect the soldiers assigned there. And full of bravado, Alan insisted that taking down a few golems would be a piece of cake. Eager for action, he rallied his team and followed Lloyd, who used his search magic to guide them to a cave where Alan finished off a golem with a decisive strike. But then, an enemy sorcerer summoned a new golem, and Lloyd quickly noticed the sorcerer was a demon, as the black stone on his staff was a magistone. The tank assumes the mage is using that stone to control the golems, while Lloyd casts a magic circle to strengthen his allies. As soon as he's done, he tells the archer to shoot the mage. After that, the white mage orders the witch to hand over her staff, and as soon as she does, the enemy mage seals the scepter. Furious, Alan makes it clear who's really in charge, saying he's eager to end the fight. But Lloyd warns him that without the magistone controlling the golem, the creature's movements become completely unpredictable, making any battle extremely dangerous. Alan ignores the warning and charges straight at the giant, forcing Lloyd to rush over and push the leader out of harm's way just in time. Annoyed, Alan yells at the kid to get out of his way, and then delivers a sword strike that brings the stone creature crashing down. With the mission over, we return to the opening scene, where the party leader decides to kick Lloyd out, accusing Lloyd of always hiding behind the others and leaving all the healing to Sheena. In other words, Lloyd isn't just useless, he's also a burden to the team. And I'm just thinking that I can't wait to see this bastard's face when he realizes he's a total nobody without our protagonist by his side. Hanging his head, the outcast admits he still lacks strength, to which Alan just laughs and tells the white mage to get lost. 3 days later, Lloyd is searching for a new group. After another failed attempt, an archer tells him they already have a white mage on their team. With each rejection, Lloyd's frustration only grows, and his luck seems to have run out. Then, suddenly, he hears a girl shouting at the guild receptionist, demanding a white mage now. The moment the staff member points to Lloyd, the adventurer runs toward him as if she's just found a treasure chest and grabs him by the arm. And with our protag being basically kidnapped, the scene changes and we see our boy Lloyd wandering through the city, beating himself up for getting kicked out of his party by Alan. We get a kind of flashback where he remembers the guy's accusations, calling him a useless white mage, a dead weight who just hides behind the team and is good for almost nothing. The only thing he knows how to do is heal, but even Sheena, another party member, could do a better job. Lloyd, poor guy, still tries to argue, asking if Alan really thinks he lacks skill. The leader, a real jerk, doesn't even bother to answer, just tells him to think whatever he wants and get lost. But as he walks away, we notice that Sheena wasn't really on board with this. probably because she'd noticed that he had skills. She realized the group had changed and weird things started happening after Lloyd joined, like how the hits she was tanking suddenly felt a lot weaker. Anyway, Lloyd heads to the center of town and comes face to face with a statue that looks just like his master, which only makes him miss her even more. The scene then shifts, and now we're following what's probably our protagonist's new group, because that crazy pink-haired girl is there. We see they're getting ready to raid a bandit territory. The mission is A rank, so this is serious business. However, we see the redhead of the team is visibly upset about something, but she's not saying a word. With that, they launch their attack, catching the bandits completely by surprise. The mage of the team starts chanting a spell, and one of the bandits spots the opening, telling his buddies to attack only after she's finished. They charge forward, shielding themselves, and when she gets tired from chanting, they move in for the kill. But the party's archer is providing cover from a distance, and with a single shot, he puts the enemies on the floor. These guys' team seems pretty balanced. Even the swordswoman and leader of the group can handle herself just fine. And even when problems pop up, the team's tank protects her with his shield. The mage then uses her magic to give the tank a strength buff, and with that extra juice, he plows through the bandits, securing the win. The bandit boss panics, looking for an escape route, but before he can do anything, the pink-haired girl finds him and tells him to surrender without a fight. The boss, acting all tough, demands to know who she is and why they were attacked out of nowhere. That's when he notices the gold pendant on her neck, an emblem that means she's an S-rank adventurer. The bandit boss still doesn't give up. He's got one last card up his sleeve. He believes that even if they're all S-rank, they won't be able to beat what he's about to summon. Using his staff, he activates a summoning spell, and a giant golem rises from the ground. With that, the swordswoman, whose name is Yui, charges in first and brings her sword down on the golem with all her might, but the thing barely even gets a scratch. The redhead, whose name is Clum and who's been spacing out from the beginning, zones out again and doesn't hear Yui telling her to buff her strength. Yui literally has to scream to get her attention. When she finally snaps out of it, she casts the physical enhancement spell. With the buff, Yui's power increases like 5-fold, and she slices the golem in half with a single strike. They capture all the bandits, and Yui goes to talk to Clum about what happened. The redhead apologizes for being distracted and says she's no longer worthy of being called an adventurer. Yui understands Clum's situation, as apparently her worries are because of her sister, Sylvie. Yui asks how Sylvie is doing, but before Clum can answer, the scene cuts back to Lloyd, right at the moment he was being rejected by an archer and then got recruited by Yui. She was so hell-bent on finding a white mage that she didn't even bother to ask his rank and just started dragging the poor guy by the hand to her party's base. She introduces Lloyd to the team and officially welcomes him, even though he hasn't even agreed to join yet. Yui's comrades realize right away that she brought the guy here without explaining anything, which is totally her style. The archer, whose name is Cross, explains that they're in a hurry because they have an urgent quest, and without Clum, they can't do it. Nobody there thinks Lloyd is a good replacement, and Lloyd himself doesn't have the guts to prove otherwise, especially after finding out they're an S-rank party. And although he's already given up on himself, Yui hasn't, and she forces him to show his magic. Lloyd thinks he's just going to let them down, but he gives it a shot anyway. He summons a staff using storage magic, which is enough to make them realize maybe this guy is actually good. And then, without even chanting a single word, he buffs everyone's strength. Nobody feels the upgrade at first, but Yui decides to test it. With a simple flick of her sword, she cuts through a tree like it's butter, leaving everyone with their jaws on the floor. Lloyd explains that he didn't just use physical enhancement. He also layered several other spells that massively boosted Yui's power. Well, that seals the deal. The reality is, Clum isn't even close to Lloyd's level, but Lloyd himself seems to have no clue just how overpowered he really is. He explains that he used 5 different spells because he assumed that if he only used one for a team of skilled adventurers like them, it would be mediocre and they wouldn't like it. He just wanted to impress them. However, seeing their stunned faces, he thinks he messed up, that what he did was mediocre. The thing about being constantly put down is that it destroys your self-esteem, and our heroes, it seems, is in the basement. He assumes he didn't impress them and says he doesn't want to be a dead weight, so he turns to leave. But the party is so shocked by what they saw, they can't even speak. However, Yui quickly snaps out of it and screams at the top of her lungs for him to come back. He returns, at least to hear what they have to say, and tells them where he came from and how the heroes' party kicked him out for being useless. Yui is shocked that he even worked for the heroes' party, but he tells them not to be impressed, because he isn't that good. Man, that kid's self-esteem is in hell, guys. He advises them to go back to their old white mage because it's better for them. That's when they tell him the story about Clum. She's good and worked with them, but her sister, Sylvie, was sick. She used to be able to adventure and take care of her, but lately she was just too tired, and it was affecting her work. In the last fight, she got distracted and almost got the whole team wiped. And even though they were fine with her staying, she got so worried that she decided to quit. Normally, they can get by without a white mage, but for A-rank missions, it's mandatory. And besides being a great addition to the team, they saw her as a good friend. Lloyd sees they're genuinely worried and thinks about how lucky she is to have such loyal teammates, compared to the ones he had. He asks about Sylvie's illness and finds out she's turning into a magic stone. He remembers reading a book about it with his master and asked if the condition was reversible. She said yes. Seeing that he could help, he asks Yui to take him to Clum's house. When they get there, she opens the door and they start talking. She reveals that she and her sister were adventurers and one day, Sylvie got injured on a mission. Lloyd asks about the nature of the illness, and Clum takes them to Sylvie's room. When she opens the door, Lloyd feels an immense magical power coming from the room. Clum removes the blanket, revealing that Sylvie's legs and hands are already stone. She says that eventually her whole body will be like that. Lloyd says he thinks he can heal her, but Clum obviously doesn't believe him, since several advanced mages had already tried and failed. However, Lloyd asks if the injury happened in a cave, and Clum, shocked, says yes. He checks where the injury started and confirms that an invading magic power is causing the symptoms. Clum still has her doubts, but he says his master told him it could work. Yui also tells Clum to trust Lloyd, so she decides to let him give it a try. He summons his staff and casts a powerful spell that leaves him feeling weak. He explains that the spell will reverse the magic power overflowing in Sylvie's body. Afterwards, he immediately casts a healing spell. Clum, in awe, says that the healing power he's using isn't just any regular spell. He admits it's a different kind and consumes more magic power, but insists it's just an ordinary healing spell. Yui asks Clum what she thinks, and she can't help but admit that the magic is anything but ordinary. It's incredible that Lloyd is casting two different spells at the same time and still has the strength to sustain them both. Yui points out that Sylvie's body is returning to normal. Clum holds her sister's hand as she completely recovers. Everyone witnessing this genuine miracle is shocked and happy. Clum is beyond grateful but reveals she can't return to the team because once her sister recovers, they'll go on adventures together. She offers to buy them around later as thanks and says she's sure the team is in good hands with Lloyd. He replies that he isn't a team member yet, and she's shocked that he still doubts himself. The scene changes and the party is out to dinner. Yui is telling the others about the crazy thing Lloyd did, but no matter how much she praises him, he still thinks he's not good enough. She tells him to stop being so modest. He apologizes to the team for not being able to get Clum to come back, but that's not their worry right now. They want to celebrate. As they talk about the future, Lloyd thinks about the heroes' party and how they made him feel compared to how he feels now. He asks if he can join them. They're shocked, since he had rejected them earlier, but they reveal they also want to work with him. And just like that, he officially joins the party. The next day, without wasting any time, the team gathers for a celebration, and Lloyd is moved by the feast his teammates have put together for him. And since he was absolutely starving, he didn't bother with ceremonies and dug into the grub with gusto, not turning down a single dish. He compliments the quality of the local food, but the others can't quite figure out why. After all, by the town standards, this restaurant was just SOSO. Still, savoring the dishes, Lloyd remembers that things weren't always like this when he was younger, back in the days when he trained with his master. Curious, his friends ask what he means. He explains that he had a tutor who taught him magic, and she used to cook with nothing but garden herbs and wild mushrooms. Meat was a rare treat. Now, everyone wants to know what kind of person his master was. Lloyd shares that she specialized in offensive magic and, in fact, it wasn't unusual for her to accidentally set off an explosion with her crazy experiments. Even so, she taught him a few support spells, since she was far more skilled than he was in every way. Excited by that description, Silica thinks about asking this mage for some tips herself one day, but Lloyd immediately warns her that doing so means putting your life on the line every single day. Cross figures she must have been pretty strict, but Lloyd admits she also had a gentle side, and that despite all her clumsiness and reckless ways, she had a kindness that really shone through. The subject then changes, and Yui asks them to start talking strategy. But first things first, everyone agrees the new guy needs to be brought up to speed on the mission details. And since Yui is a disaster at explaining things, she tries to pass the responsibility to Dagas, who points out that, technically, she's the team leader. But since she's dodging her duties, he'll take over. So, the shield bearer lays out the plan. The goal is to wipe out groups of monsters that have been destroying farms in the area. Apparently, it's not just one kind of creature behind the attacks, but all sorts of different races banding together, which is something adventurers have never seen before. Since they're up against so many enemies, Cross admits he and Yui will have a tough time, and the captain adds that in moments like these, they really rely on Silica's area spells. Even so, the mage points out she can't run out of mana during a crucial battle, so she'll need the others to help her save energy. That's when Yui asks if Lloyd can use offensive magic. He says yes, though his spells aren't as strong as his support magic. Dagas then assigns everyone's roles. He and Yui will draw the monster's attention first, giving Silica a chance to blast them all at once. At the same time, Cross will hang back to protect both her and Lloyd, who'll be providing support with buffs and healing. Silica confesses she's excited to see Lloyd's support magic in action, but he makes it clear they shouldn't expect anything too spectacular. And just because he said that, I'm already even more curious. But for the group, that statement was like raining on their parade. Yui even tells him he ought to have a little more confidence, but he reminds them he was kicked out of the hero squad for lack of skill. Cross, for his part, says he'd prefer someone who's genuinely humble like Lloyd over a bunch of arrogant jerks who look down on other people, and the team agrees with him, no reservations. Leaving the tavern, everyone promises to meet again at the inn the next morning. While the four veterans head off together, Lloyd goes his own way. Dagas asks where he's going, since the hotel is in the other direction. Lloyd, all sheepish, admits he doesn't have the money to pay for a room. So, the tanker tosses him a pouch of coins as an advance for the missions they'll be doing together. Showing immense gratitude for this sign of trust, Lloyd promises he'll earn every coin. That night, back in his room, Lloyd reflects on how kind everyone on this team is and resolves to work hard to repay their kindness. The next day, they all meet up and wait for Yui to come out of her house. She's got a backpack on, unlike the others, and asks why nobody else is carrying one. Cross explains that Lloyd used his storage magic for everyone, meaning he can magically carry all their gear. Yui gets all excited and hands her stuff over to the white mage, who uses his staff to stash it all, leaving the leader amazed that carrying heavy loads on the road will never be a problem again thanks to our protag. Lloyd even offers to teach the trick to the others, who had no idea they could learn it too. According to him, everyone is born with at least a little mana, so with some practice, anyone can do the same. Feeling much lighter for obvious reasons, the team heads out toward the farms in high spirits. Once they reach a certain area, Dagas points out that just past those mountains lies the Megacracy, the land of the demons. Right now, they're keeping a low profile, but he wonders when they'll make another move to conquer the continent, since that's always their goal. A little further on, the group comes across a bridge that was swaying so much it sent a shiver down their spines, because if you fell from there, there'd be nothing left to tell the tale. Trying to lighten the mood, Yui distracts everyone with a question. When you need to invent something on the spot to get through a tough time, what do you do with water? The others start tossing out answers. I boil it, I spill it, I freeze it, I toss it, I drink it, I pour it over my head. Seeing that Lloyd is completely lost in space, The captain tells him to join in with his own silly answer. He doesn't really get why they do it, saying he didn't learn this from his mentor. Cross then explains that the whole point is to say something goofy on purpose and laugh about being wrong. Our protagonist promises he'll take the attempt to answer something idiotic seriously, which Yui mentions won't be much fun if he takes it so seriously, since this is a game meant to chill everyone out. Being tense goes against the purpose. He asks why they do it, and she replies that even if the mission is challenging, staying tense will just wear you out and won't solve anything. She then asks another question. When you split a hunt, you divide it into equal parts, but what do you call someone who forges and divides a completely new path? The three most experienced teammates quickly chime in: trail cutter, trail splitter, and trail sharer. And Lloyd, who was last and almost blowing a fuse in his head to answer, just says, a broken trail. His friends cut him some slack, saying he's getting into the spirit of it, and our protagonist is happy to be welcomed. Meanwhile, deep in a forest, a hooded figure kneels in prayer before a black stone radiating chaotic energy. Back with the group, since they're not hauling heavy packs, they reach the campsite earlier than expected and waste no time setting up the tents and the fire. Yui asks if she can take a bath now, but Dagas reminds her they still need to gather firewood and look for food. Hearing that, Lloyd volunteers to get the wood, giving Yui the chance to drag Silica toward the water. A little while later, after picking up some branches, Lloyd figures he's found enough. As he's stowing the wood, he spots some fruits just like the ones his master once revived with magic, so he bites into one and decides to take a bunch back for the group. Suddenly, he hears a girl scream and rushes toward the sound. At the river, where Yui and Silica were bathing, a giant aquatic creature appears menacingly. Lloyd recognizes it instantly, a basilisk. With the advantage of being in the water, the serpent surges toward the girls, its speed making it impossible for them to escape. At the last second, Lloyd gets close enough to cast an offensive spell at the basilisk, drawing its attention and allowing the girls to swim to safety. He quickly pulls their weapons out of storage and tosses them over, then gives them a support spell. As the basilisk lunges at Lloyd, Yui darts forward and slices the beast in half. Even wounded, it refuses to go down without a fight. Seeing the battle isn't over, Silica conjures a fireball and incinerates the creature. She can't even believe the overwhelming power she just unleashed. Yui, in fact, is impressed with her teammate's performance, and her teammate, in turn, still hasn't processed the crazy thing that just happened. In any case, Yui thanks Lloyd for his help, since if it weren't for him, they'd surely have been barbecue. Anyway, she gives her sword to Lloyd for him to store, and fate decided to be cruel to the girl, because after that her towel fell, causing her to let out a huge scream of embarrassment. The scene then changes, and later, the team gathers to learn storage magic from Lloyd. We see that our protag has the girl's handprint tattooed on his face, as if it were his fault she lost her towel. Lloyd continues explaining the basics, mentioning that you just have to create an opening between your palms and put something inside. Honestly, nobody gets a damn thing, but they try anyway. Seeing they're not getting anywhere, Lloyd apologizes for not being a better teacher and for being so useless. Dagas tells him not to be so hard on himself. And seeing how understanding his friends are, Lloyd finally cracks a smile. At that moment, Silica gets the idea to say the word storage out loud, and like magic, it happens in her hands. And then they understand that since they're not like Lloyd, they just need to use chance. When night falls, the team's white mage sits by the fire while Yui keeps watch, noting there are no monsters around. Sensing her mood, Lloyd asks if something's wrong. She sits down and thanks him for joining the group. He says there's no need, he was in trouble and looking for work anyway. Even so, the captain feels like she forced him onto the team. Lloyd then asks why she's so focused on this mission, and she confides that it reminds her of her hometown. When Yui was a child, monsters attacked her village, and she was the only survivor. That's why she couldn't just turn a blind eye when she heard about monsters attacking farms. In the middle of her story, Lloyd tells her to be quiet and wake the others while he grabs his staff. Once everyone is up, the team hides among the trees to watch a group of giant spiders crossing the forest. Matching the description from their quest, the spiders loop around and start moving toward the group. The adventurers try to retreat quietly, but Yui steps on a branch, alerting the monsters, who immediately give chase. One of the spiders makes a huge leap, landing right in front of them, giving the other two time to surround the group. Quickly, everyone summons their weapons and tries to block the web attacks, but Silica gets her staff stuck to a tree. Before they know it, the whole battlefield is covered in silk. In desperation, Dagas asks what they should do, and Lloyd announces that he'll make their legs stop moving. Wielding his staff, the white mage conjures several magic circles and tells Yui to go on the offensive. As Dagas blocks another web shot, the swordswoman leaps over him and slashes through a wall of webs that was pinning the team down. With the way clear, Cross jumps into the tree where Silica's staff is stuck and manages to get her weapon back. Yui then raises her scabbard to shield herself from a spider's web shot, and using that opening she rushes in and slices the monster's legs. The second enemy steps up to face her but meets the same fate. Then, as the second spider fires its web, Yui uses the force to propel herself straight toward the third, gaining just enough momentum to cut off two of its legs in a single strike. Silica is able to jump into the fight at that moment, unleashing a flurry of fireballs. At the same time, Cross fires arrows through each one, triggering a fiery explosion as they hit the spider. With the battle won, Lloyd comes back to his senses and apologizes to the group for giving orders. But Dagas assures him it was actually a huge help. After all, the white mage has the talent and the knowledge for it. Yui says they'll be counting on him from now on. In other words, he's kind of become the unofficial leader of the party, and our protagonist is very happy with their trust. The next morning, the group breaks camp, with each member storing their own gear. As the others set off, Lloyd wonders why there were spiders, which he calls powlarks, in this area and where they might be headed. But before he can think too much, Yui calls out to him, and he hurries to rejoin the group. At night, when the team sets up camp, Lloyd can't stop thinking about the strange behavior of those creatures, thinking to himself that it looked like the entire pack was heading to the same place. At that moment, Yui comes over and interrupts the mage's thoughts to ask if he's going to take the night watch alone again. When he says yes, Silica chimes in, warning that he's going to ruin his health if he keeps this up night after night. However, Lloyd insists on standing guard so the others can save their strength. Besides, he was used to sleepless nights, and since he was still inexperienced, this was the only way he felt he could really help out. Yui starts to grumble that he's more important than he thinks, but Silica sees that our pro-tag won't budge and decides to let him do as he wishes, as long as he promises to speak up if things get tough. The next day, as the group continues their journey, the swordswoman keeps looking over at Lloyd for some reason. After a moment's rest, she realizes he can use a detection spell to sense enemies nearby and almost freaks out, since this is a pretty advanced magic. But our boy Lloyd, however, doesn't think much of it, since his spell couldn't even scan that large an area, but he admits that it's better than nothing. He then mentions that he planned to keep casting the spell at regular intervals to make sure the surroundings were safe. Yui worries that this routine might exhaust him, but he assures her he's fine. And well, with a hopeful look, she asks if there's any way she can help, but when he says no, she gets embarrassed and has to admit there's nothing more she can do. The scene then changes, and that night, while Lloyd was once again keeping watch by the campfire, the group's leader asks Silica if that guy simply doesn't trust the rest of the team. Sure, he was helpful and always willing, but he never seemed to rely on his companions for anything. Silica explains that everyone has their own pace and reminds her that she and Yui weren't that close at first either. The mage mentions that he probably has self-esteem issues, which makes it hard for him to connect with others, and that all he needs now is time and space. Yui, hearing this, comments that Lloyd is a real mystery. He didn't know much about ordinary things but seemed to know a lot about other stuff, and that just made her even more curious about what kind of life he'd led. As for that, Silica was certain Lloyd would share his story with them one day, as long as they didn't rush him. The warrior agrees but isn't entirely convinced, since someone as unusual as him could pull a rabbit out of a hat at any moment. And speaking of our protag, the scene cuts over to him. Dagas comes over and asks the mage to take a walk with him. Lloyd says he can't leave his post, but Cross shows up and offers to take over. A few hours later, Dagas shows Lloyd a series of bells he'd strung throughout the forest, perfect for alerting them if a monster passed by. With that done, he tells Lloyd he can get some rest. But Mr. Stubborn refuses, feeling like he still had to stand guard. Dagas explains that's exactly what the team did before he joined them. In other words, they've survived without him before, so he really didn't need to worry. Lloyd still tries to argue that he wouldn't be able to use his detection magic if he fell asleep. So Dagas gets straight to the point, asking him point blank if he doesn't trust the team. Caught off guard, Lloyd insists it's just about being careful, not trust. But Dagas points out that Lloyd always takes on the job of detection and night watch alone, without including anyone else, and that made the others feel like he didn't trust them. That comment made Lloyd remember his old mentor, who'd always said how inexperienced he was, and Alan, who'd called him useless. With those words echoing in his mind, Lloyd stresses that he just doesn't want to be a burden to the team. Dagas replies that Lloyd should be a burden, because that's what teams are for, to make sure no one has to face every hardship alone. And that honestly, the team expects Lloyd to make mistakes, and if he does, his friend wants him to know that he can count on his friends. Embarrassed, Lloyd realizes he'd never even considered that, and Dagas even wonders where this guy came from. Our pro tag hesitates, asking if it's really okay for someone as weak as him to depend on others. But his colleague reassures him, saying that no one in the group thinks the support mage lacks talent. With that, he invites Lloyd to hit the hay. Before drifting off, Lloyd thinks about everything he'd heard and finds himself liking the idea of having friends who actually cared about him. At dawn, Yui stretches like a cat, until Lloyd comes over and, after a moment's hesitation, asks if she can help him fetch some water. Of course, she agrees, and the rest of the team watches the scene unfold, with smiles on their faces. The scene then changes, and elsewhere, inside a mansion, a hooded servant informs his master that he'll file his report once they finish placing the magic stones at the designated coordinates. The master replies that, with that done, the path is open. He asks about the high-level adventurers operating in Ishtar, and the servant says that the monsters they'd gathered have flooded the adventurers with requests, so most of them are out of the city right now. Those who stayed behind are all low-level, with the exception of the heroes' party. The boss wished he could get rid of that last group too, but unfortunately, the hero only acts at the kingdom's request. But either way, it would be interesting to see what this team can do alone in the eye of the storm. With that, the servant is instructed to notify the client that it's time, and takes his leave of Lord Michel. Back with the S-rank group, Yui starts to feel that something is off in the forest. The rest of the team agrees, especially when Cross points out that they haven't run into a single monster since entering this deep part. Yui asks if Lloyd did anything with his magic, but he says no, as he's been using his detection spell periodically, but that doesn't keep the monsters away. Speaking of which, he expands his search radius and spots a pack of monsters about 10 kilometers ahead. Checking the map, Cross realizes that direction puts them right near the farm where the group is headed. Yui raises an eyebrow. Didn't Lloyd say he couldn't scan that large an area? Lloyd admits that 10 kilometers doesn't feel like much to him. Silica points out that's just 10 times more than average. And even though the gang gets a little freaked out by the white mage's power, the team tries to keep calm and focus on the situation, with Cross warning that her heart is gonna give out if she keeps being scared by this guy's power. And so, about 10 kilometers later, they arrive at the mission's farm. And from what they found, there's certainly a massive pack of dire wolves surrounding the place. But that's not what catches Lloyd's attention. According to him, what really stands out is the fact that this is the only spot his search magic is picking up any monsters. The question is, where did all the others go? Silica and the others agree it's seriously weird, as there should be plenty of other creatures as strong as these wolves in the area. Lloyd asks where the current owner of the farm is, and Yui says she heard he was injured by a wolf and is staying at his son's place in town. Suddenly, Cross points to something black and ominous in the middle of the farm, but no one else can see it, since his eyesight is way better than the rest of the group. Taking that into account, Lloyd casts a spell to enhance his own vision. And now he can see it. What's there is a magic stone radiating dark energy. He then uses the same spell on the others so they can see it too. And after a quick analysis, our pro tag starts to believe that the shadowy mist around the stone is beast folk mana. He remembers his mentor mentioning that there are beastmen capable of using a rare magic to command monsters, and it sure seems like this magic stone is behind what's happening. At that moment, Lloyd detects another wave of monsters heading their way, more than 1,000 creatures of all sorts. And that's when he's sure that everything is connected to that giant magic stone. He wonders if someone is trying to get rid of them but decides that would be way too indirect. If that were the case, Cross thinks they should fall back. But Yui refuses. If they retreat, the monsters will destroy every field in the area. The archer asks if she really plans to take on 1,000 monsters at once, and she falls silent. On the other hand, Dagas doubts they could even escape from so many enemies, and Silica adds that if the monsters chase them and there's a battle near town, the townspeople could be in serious danger. Finally, Lloyd decides the best move is to fight, and he's already got a plan. And the first step is to take care of that magic stone. He asks the archer if he can hit it from here. Cross figures he can but doubts he can destroy it. Lloyd says that's fine, as just hitting it will be enough. So, Cross readies his bow. At the same time, the support mage provides a boost to make up for the lack of firepower. And when the arrow flies with the added buff, we see that it was enough to shatter the magic stone. Impressed, Cross asks what Lloyd just did. He explains that he simply cast enhancement magic on the archer, the bow, and the arrows. Cross is in disbelief that the madman can buff people and weapons at the same time. And once again, Lloyd just thought that was standard procedure. Immediately, the group watches as the wolves revert to their natural ferocity after the stone shatters, turning on each other. Yui asks if Lloyd expected that. He says it was obvious that Thing was manipulating the beast's behavior. However, he'd also thought it was controlling the approaching horde. But apparently not, since that enormous mass of monsters is still closing in at full speed. And finally, the horde draws dangerously close to the 4 humans. Since the white mage claimed he could hold off the beasts, Yui says it's time to do something. But he replies that the timing still isn't right. The rest of the team starts to get seriously nervous, while the mage stays calm, waiting for the perfect moment. Then, when 3 wolves lunge at Silica, Lloyd tells her to react. And with that, shit's about to go down. She responds with a firestorm spell, and even she is impressed with the intensity of her magic, as she's never seen anything that powerful come from her staff before. Yui wants to know what kind of sorcery Lloyd used. He explains he just used magic power boost and mana cost reduction on her. The firestorm rages across the land, engulfing the horde in flames. But Lloyd tells Silica to cast it again, and then follow up with a wind spell. Cross realizes that the flames and the monsters will keep burning after the wind magic fans the fire, and plus, the smoke will make it harder for the flying monsters to see. Next, Lloyd initiates a telepathy spell with the archer to share the exact enemy positions he's detected. And with the locations clear in his mind, Cross is able to ignore the smoke and land pinpoint shots on the winged beasts swooping down from the sky, one after another. Up to this point, everything's going according to plan. But our boy Lloyd isn't one to leave things to chance, so he stays in command and tells Silica it's time for the final phase. But she warns that her mana is running on fumes. With that, he asks for her hand and performs a mana transfer. This left him stunned, as he gave her a lot of energy at once. But still, he told her to focus back on the fight. Silica raised her staff and cast Luvia, unleashing a powerful downpour that snuffed out the fire before it could spiral out of control, drenching the entire forest. After pulling off such a powerful spell, the mage was out of mana for good. She lost control of her body and simply collapsed. And before she could fall, Dagas appeared there to catch her. Yui assured her friend that they'd handle the rest. Silica, struggling to speak, told them not to push themselves too hard. The swordswoman couldn't help but laugh at the irony, hearing that from someone who had almost bit the dust from trying too hard. Leaving that aside, Yui pointed out that Lloyd had been brilliant for coming up with a plan like that. But, true to his rock-bottom self-esteem, Lloyd just shrugged it off and said he hadn't done anything special, just what any support should do. Seeing there was no changing this guy's mind, she gave up on the pep talk and drew her sword, ready to finish the job. Dagas hoisted his shield, moving to stand by her side. Meanwhile, Lloyd collapses on the grass, as he's feeling his strength fading. Frustrated that he's exhausted from just this, Lloyd thinks to himself that he has a long road ahead of him.
The scene changes and we move to a previously unknown location, where a beast woman lets out a terrified scream after being grabbed by a demon, while a beast man, who looks a lot like her, rushes to save her but can't reach the attacker. Frustrated, he unleashes a furious roar, vowing that the demon will pay for what he's done. The scene changes, and now, back with our group of heroes, we see that Lloyd, having recovered from his exhaustion, mentions that all signs point to them being deceived and that the person behind all this is targeting Ishtar. As they set out again, the white mage conjures several vials filled with a purple liquid, emphasizing that this mission was probably a trap from the start. He mentions that by sending high-level adventurers on previous missions, their enemies were actually drawing them away from Ishtar, weakening the city's defenses. Cross argues that the city still has the hero and the knights to protect it, but Daggis admits that Lloyd's deduction, at least to him, makes perfect sense. In any case, the archer reminds everyone that the magic stone they saw before was also strange, and the whole group agrees the city might be in danger and they need to head back. So Lloyd puts away the box of potions after downing one himself and casts a support spell on his allies. After that, he takes off at a colossal speed, and the gang is left wondering what the hell this madman is doing. However, when they try to run, they realize they're as light as feathers, and because of that, extremely fast. As they run, they end up catching up to our protag and ask what's going on. He replies that he cast a speed boost spell on everyone. Elsewhere, back at the secluded mansion, the demon who kidnapped the beast woman arrives. Lord Michel welcomes his esteemed client, but the visitor asks not to be called that. The host laughs and says that Great General Grist sounds way too formal anyway. Grist then warns that the Vanguard is closing in on Ishtar and that their plan is working, all thanks to that woman. Speaking of which, he hopes she'll be useful in the future too. Michelle agrees she's a special one and that they stand to gain a lot by using her. Grist doesn't quite get what he means by that, but considering people once called him the Demon Lord's right-hand man, the least he can do is trust his talent. As for the rest, the man insists he can do anything as long as he's paid well for it. Meanwhile, the beast girl who was kidnapped is now locked up in a cell. Michelle appears with a box of potions, mentioning that it's time to borrow her power. After that, he uses a machine to manipulate a black magic stone and set his wicked plan in motion. Back in the forest, we see that Lloyd and his friends are going hard on the marathon towards Ishtar. After a long run, they stop to catch their breath. Lloyd summons the same box of purple potions and hands one to each of them. Silica worries the mage will run out of mana if he keeps buffing everyone all the way to Ishtar, but he reassures her, saying he's gotten so much practice that he barely uses any magical energy. Impressed, she asks if he's done this many times before, and he just shrugs, saying it's something you get used to. He explains that a long time ago, his master dumped him in a forest far from civilization and made him find his way home alone as training. For a white mage, fighting monsters alone is nearly impossible, meaning running away was all he could do. To survive, he had to use every type of enhancement magic he knew, pointing out that he lived through a true hell during that process. Yui comments that he really went through the ringer as a kid, but our protag just considers himself inexperienced and firmly states that it was a normal form of training. Yui and Silico obviously disagree, insisting that Lloyd's training was neither normal nor healthy. This makes him think that maybe, just maybe, he hasn't trained enough. After all, he's traveling with a team of S-rank adventurers, while he's nowhere near that level, and he feels he needs to work even harder to catch up. The girls sigh, lamenting that the guy has a screw loose, but decide to follow the doctor's advice and just let the crazy guy be. Finally, Daggis calls everyone back to the road, and the white mage does what he does best, which is layering enhancement spells, which ends up triggering a detection spell to sense possible enemies nearby. Hours later, they've already made their way through the thick forest and are closing in on Ishtar. The girls in the group praise how fast they've been able to travel without ever losing their breath, until Lloyd, without warning, slams on the brakes, causing a pileup with all of his teammates. After rolling to a very undignified stop, Daggis demands to know why he stopped so suddenly. He explains that his detection spell picked up something, and although he has no idea what it is, The feeling is so ominous that he has a terrible sense of foreboding. He asks the others to continue on to Ishtar, while he checks out the situation himself. Yui offers to go with him, since this could turn into a real fight and a white mage shouldn't go in alone. The rest of the team quickly insists on joining too, as no one wants to leave their friend to face the unknown by himself. In another scene change, we see 4 individuals in black robes gather around a magical artifact to demonstrate their power once again. We return once more to the protagonist group. As night falls, Lloyd and his companions reach a cabin. He can sense demons nearby along with someone of a different race. Yui, worried, asks if he means demons from the Magocracy, which he confirms. Before they left, Dagus had mentioned that beyond those mountains lay the nation of demons, and that race has been hiding out lately, but could emerge at any moment to try and conquer the continent. Lloyd remembers that demons are strictly forbidden from entering the 3 main nations, and the Magocracy isn't exactly known for respecting rules. Yui then asks if he has any memories of the Magocracy from when he was younger, but he says he remembers nothing from his childhood, and that the war was already over by the time he went to live with his mentor. Silica realizes the mage is a war orphan, while Yui apologizes for suggesting that Lloyd didn't care. Cross suggests that they should report this to the knights when they get back to town, but the mage wants to gather more information before leaving. Even though it's dangerous, Lloyd can sense the same mana from the magic stone, and Dagus thinks it might be related to those monsters that attacked the farm. Lloyd agrees, adding that Ishtar is their real target, then it's worth the risk to investigate further. With everyone on board, the group approaches the cabin. Cross peers through the window, but it seems empty. With that, Lloyd casts his detection spell again and senses the enemy presence underground. He asks Silica to use her earth magic and give the team a buff. Silica conjures the sandbox and collapses the roof right on top of the hooded figures gathered below. Yui wastes no time. She bursts in and takes down the first man. She demands to know who they are and what they're doing. But one of the men reacts, lifting the fallen stones with magic and hurling them at her. She's quick, deflecting the rocks with her sword. Cross fires an arrow, hitting the attacker just as his ally tries to escape. Lloyd buffs Silica, who casts the sandbox again to keep up the offensive. Another enemy retaliates with more levitation magic. Dagus jumps in to shield everyone with his shield. Seeing that their attacks aren't working, the hooded figures start to panic and flee. Yui chases after one of the escapees, only to run right into an ambush, but Cross covers her with his bow, taking down 2 more enemies before they can harm her. Now only one remains. The last one runs over to the beast woman prisoner and casts a spell that wraps her in a sort of cocoon, starting to levitate her out of there. But the adventurers rush in to set things right. The man dashes up the stairs, and Lloyd tells Yui to circle around and intercept him. He senses a powerful magical signature coming from inside the cocoon. Before long, Yui and the group's archer manage to corner the fugitive. But he doesn't surrender. He unleashes a flurry of lightning bolts. Lloyd throws up magical shields to protect everyone, until finally one of the bolts hits the caster himself, knocking him out. With the threat neutralized, Lloyd dispels the cocoon and discovers the prisoner is a beast woman. The adventurers quickly bring her inside the cabin. Silica guesses she must be from the Forest Empire. Believing she can shed some light on what's happening, they ask Lloyd to try and revive her. The mage casts an exceptionally powerful healing spell, the same one Yui saw cure Sylvie. On top of that, our protag says he's improved the spell since then. And Yui is obviously shocked, as she had no idea that adventurers could actually improve magic like that, leaving Lloyd baffled by her reaction. Silica, equally surprised, agrees that being able to alter a spell is incredible. He explains that his master used to force him to help with things like that. He remembers all too well. Every 5 minutes, she'd come up with a new thing, asking for help with her spells to stop aging, cure baldness, or other things. Day after day, Lloyd is more convinced that his master is completely eccentric. Yui, on the other hand, thinks that word is too mild to describe what that woman is really like, but lets it go, because at that moment the spell takes effect and the sleeping beast woman starts to wake up. Yui, barely able to contain her excitement, starts to practically interview the girl. Eventually she reveals her name is Kureha. The human asks why she was held captive by those bastards, but the beast woman seems too frightened to answer. Seeing this, Lloyd explains that they're adventurers, sent on a mission, and that he sensed the mana of someone from the beast folk. From what he's heard, some beast folk can control monsters through magic, and maybe, just maybe, Kureha was responsible for what happened at the farm. Hearing this, she confesses that it was her spell that caused the whole mess. Meanwhile, in the forest, two Ishtar scouts stumble upon a gigantic magic stone and realize that a huge number of creatures are lurking, guarding the object. With no hope of fighting, they turn to flee, only for one to be taken down instantly by vicious wolves. Parallel to this, an army of creatures begins to march through the forest toward the city. Back at the cabin, the adventurers are shocked to learn there really is a spell capable of controlling monsters. Kureha confirms the demons forced her to use that power, turning it into a weapon, which all but confirms that the Magocracy is behind the attack on Ishtar. And the big issue now is that if the demons' plan was to leave the city's defenses open, Ishtar might already be in danger.
Given the circumstances, the group rushes back toward Ishtar with Kureha joining them. Lloyd feels bad for dragging her into all this, but she admits she'd be in even bigger trouble if they left her behind. After running for some time, they stopped for a quick break, and everyone is anxious to reach the city. Lloyd uses his detection magic and senses a horde of monsters heading for the city. However, that's not all, as there's an army coming right behind them. Yui turns to the mage and asks what they should do next. In response, he asks to borrow Kureha's power. At the same time, he tells the others to warn the city about the imminent danger. Yui threatens to protest, but Lloyd points out that no one can handle two things at once, and reassures her that everything will work out as long as they work together. Bolstered by his words, the group quickly grasps the seriousness of the situation. He then casts an enhancement spell to make the allies' perilous journey a little easier. And with that, Yui, Dagus, Cross, and Silica set out for Ishtar, while our protag and Kureha leave to follow their own mission.
So let's head over to the Disgusting Heroes group, and we see that he was pissed because, according to him, all the candidates for recruitment were terrible. In his opinion, the guys were more useless than that piece of trash Lloyd, especially since none of them even used storage magic, while Mia mentioned their limit was just 2 enhancement spells at a time. The rest of the group started to wonder if maybe Lloyd was, in fact, exceptional, and that the leader had simply never noticed. And even with all the facts and the truth staring him in the face, the imbecile Alan simply insisted that it was impossible because Lloyd was worthless. And if things weren't going so well, the tendency was for them to get worse. At that moment, a royal knight entered the office to bring news from a patrol in the forest. A horde of over 10,000 monsters was advancing toward Ishtar, and the army needed the adventurer group to help form the defensive lines. Hearing this, Alan saw a golden opportunity to make a name for himself. He ordered word to be sent to the troops that they would be ready for battle soon, especially since it was a royal request, mentioning that now he could finally prove he was the most powerful warrior in the kingdom. The scene changes, and not far away, we see that Lloyd and Kureha were already keeping an eye on the horde. He mentions that if a horde of this size joined the main force, Ishtar would be wiped off the map. With that in mind, he concludes that splitting up was the best decision. With the scenario set, the objective was simple: find a way to defeat these enemies. Kureha, however, wanted to know if there was a way to do this without spilling blood, since these monsters were just being controlled and not acting on their own. And since they were being controlled using her power, she ends up feeling guilty. Seeing her concern, Lloyd promised to find a way to avoid hurting them as much as possible. After all, he's a pacifist and agrees that it's always better to solve things without unnecessary violence. With that in mind, he asked if it was possible for Kureha to use her magic to send the monsters back home, but she explained that it probably wasn't, as there were too many of them. In that case, the mage suggested amplifying her magic to try anyway, and even though she thought it was impossible, she still agreed to give it a shot. The support mage began to prepare his buff to increase her power, but her spell ended up being blocked. That's when she realized something in the forest was interfering. The scene changes, and back at the guild, we see that Alan was gathered with the other warriors who would join the kingdom's battle force. As usual, he was acting arrogant, belittling everyone else's skills as if he were on another level, especially since all the rank A and higher adventurers were out of town, leaving only rank B and below. Hearing the provocations from the most imbecilic hero that could possibly exist, several adventurers were already boiling with rage, but the wimp over there obviously just shrugged it off and mentioned that maybe they'd just serve as meat shields. At that moment, the guild branch director arrived to cool everyone's jets, reminding them that the real enemies were the monsters and there was no time for infighting. Not wanting to lose the spotlight, Alan raised his voice and presented his brilliant battle plan. First, each mage would unleash their most powerful spells, with each one taking down about 10 monsters, allowing the infantry to advance and buy more time. Then the mages would fire another round, and so on. At that, one of the mages raised her hand and admitted she couldn't cast anything that strong. Another said he could take down maybe one enemy at a time tops. Alan exploded at these statements, claiming that everyone there should be able to do more. However, even his own teammate Mia confessed she wasn't feeling very confident, as her spells had gotten weaker and she couldn't cast them the same way anymore. This only made Alan even more pissed. He demanded to know why she hadn't mentioned something so important earlier, and she explained that she wasn't the only one, saying that Lulu, Sheena, and even Lena had all been weaker since Lloyd left the group. Alan felt deceived by all of them, but Lena pointed out that it was his fault for being an imbecile and not paying attention, mentioning that he had become so sure of himself that he simply ignored the warnings they had been trying to give for a long time. In fact, she added that because of that, she didn't even think he was qualified to call himself a hero. Fuming at her words, Alan tried to throw a punch at her, but she blocked it with ease. Under the weight of everyone's judgmental stares, the imbecile hero completely lost it and stormed out of the guild, stomping his feet. His teammates ran after him, with the exception of Lena. The remaining adventurers quickly realized that this so-called hero was nothing like the rumors claimed, and morale dropped drastically. Noticing this, Lena decided to take responsibility, assuring the adventurers that she would leave the hero's group, cut ties with him, and join the others on the front lines. Furthermore, she suggested they bring in a certain mage named Lloyd. And speaking of the guy, the scene changes, and we see that he had just discovered the source of the problem controlling the hordes, a huge magic stone, almost identical to the one from the farm. Kurahea noted that it was imbued with a dark power that interfered with her spells, and that there were probably several scattered around. In other words, if they wanted to regain control, they'd have to deal with all of them. She could sense the magic stones if she got close enough, but in such a vast area, that was difficult. Hearing this, our boy Lloyd combined telepathy with a search spell to extend her senses. On top of that, with a concealment spell, he could get her close to the stones without the monsters noticing, though the spell would break if they took a heavy hit. With this plan, they approached the first magic stone and managed to neutralize its power. Now it was time to go for the next one. The scene changed once more, and meanwhile, the defenses of Ishtar are preparing for the arrival of the enemy horde. While one of the soldiers wonders if this is really the right thing to do, the guild branch director understands his concern. After all, the lives of every single fighter there depended on one man. Hours earlier back at the guild, Lena had explained that Lloyd, the white mage, was the true pillar of the heroes party, not the figures the public knows best. She recognizes that everyone was so blinded by the glorification of the hero that they completely overlooked the person who actually made things happen. The director asked if Lloyd was really responsible for the brilliant way the strongest adventurer group fought, and the warrior confirmed it without hesitation. Moreover, she assured him that this war could only be won with his help. The problem was, she had no idea where he was. Since the director tracked all registered adventurers, he explained that Lloyd had gone on a mission with a rank S group, and the trip alone would take several days. Even so, Lena believed he could arrive much sooner using some kind of travel magic, unless he was tied up with that mission at the moment. Either way, she hoped everyone would trust that the mage was doing exactly what needed to be done right now. Back in the present, the director explained that everyone had agreed to Lena's proposal, but doubt still lingered. After all, everyone wanted to protect their families, their friends, and everyone they loved. Finally, the horde arrived, and Lena ordered the archers to fire their arrows. Their shots took down part of the monster's front line, and then the shield-bearers shouted for the advancing enemies to be pushed into the trench. While the mages launched fireballs towards the swarm, waves of water followed, flooding the trenches to drown the creatures and widen the pit, making it even harder for the enemy to cross. The plan was simple: hold out until the rank S adventurers returned. Only then would they have a real chance. And speaking of them, Yui and her companions were advancing toward Ishtar. Boosted by Lloyd's support magic, which kept everyone from getting exhausted along the way, the mere presence of the white mage was enough to inspire them to give their all. Even at night, they refused to rest. Every minute lost was a minute the city was being brutally attacked. Meanwhile, Lloyd and Kurahea finally reached the last magic stone, guarded by high-rank wolves and blood panthers. When she deactivated the stone, the savage look vanished from the creature's eyes, but this only revealed another problem, as wolves and panthers were natural enemies, and now the two species were attacking each other. When the first two clashed, they knocked over the magic stone, and in that instant, Kurahea lost her invisibility. Every beast in sight turned their snarling gazes toward her, and to save her ally, Lloyd cast a spell to draw all their attention to himself. We cut back to Ishtar, and we see that the situation there is starting to get complicated as some monsters manage to jump over the trench and reach the shield bearers, who raise their shields to block the attack and push them back. On the front line, with her guard up and leading the tanks, Lena was informed that the right flank had suffered severe damage, and as if that wasn't enough, the defensive line broke, allowing the monsters to wreak havoc. But at that critical moment, a light at the end of the tunnel appeared as the Rank S adventurers arrived. Elsewhere, Lloyd kept the enemies busy with his physical enhancement spells, and although this didn't mean he could take them all on at once, Kurahea knew that he was only able to avoid the monsters with great skill, not defeat them. Even so, despite not being able to fight head-on, that human was doing everything in his power to protect her. And seeing that the situation was starting to get critical for our protagonist, she then began to sing. Her voice caused an aura to emanate from her body, while the sung melody caught the attention of all the nearby monsters. Reaching out to them, she slowly convinced them to retreat. When Lloyd ran over to ask what she had done, she explained that she had simply convinced them to return to the forest, mentioning that her spell didn't control them, but only allowed her to share her thoughts with them. Lloyd thanked her for saving him, and she returned the sentiment because at the end of the day, they had each risked themselves for the other. With that settled, they needed to head to Ishtar immediately. We return then to the city where all hell was breaking loose, and the Rank S adventurers were giving everything they had to help out. However, the sheer number of enemies soon began to overwhelm them, and the front line started to crumble. The archers were running out of arrows, the mages were almost out of mana, and still, Lena stood out as the most inspirational figure on the field, being the pillar that held the front line together, making everyone believe that if they could just hold on, victory would come. But you don't win a battle on determination alone, and we see that warriors were falling in droves, the defenses were crumbling, and everything indicated that things had gone south. However, against all odds, we see that Kurahea appeared there and began to sing her song. Her beautiful voice echoed through the chaos, calming the savage eyes of the creatures that were attacking so fiercely. And then, as if it were a true miracle, the monsters turned around and simply began to walk away slowly, while Yui's group spotted Lloyd and exploded in relief. Seeing how exhausted Kurahea was from so much singing, the white mage held her by the shoulders to make sure she was okay. He was jaw-dropped by her ability, just as she was by his support magic. After all, she could never have cast her spell across such a vast battlefield without him.
She asks what kind of help he provided, and our OP protag then explains that he cast several layers of mana consumption reduction and magical power boost. Even so, no matter how much he contributed, the mage knows it was the girl who did most of the work, and he makes sure to point that out. With that, she reveals that her real name is Claire. But just when we think we're getting a happy ending before the moment can be digested, we see that some stone giants arrive at the walls of Ishtar, making it clear that the war is far from over.
A day later, Michelle was looking over a map with satisfaction, imagining that Ishtar must be under siege by 30,000 monsters at that very moment. But then, a messenger rushed into his mansion to report that the advancing horde had suddenly begun to scatter. The scene then changed, and we see that Claire was lamenting that the golems couldn't hear her, while Lloyd suspected some kind of demonic interference was stalling the process. To reach the front lines before the monsters, the support mage cast a spell that boosted their speed, dodging through the enemy ranks and nearly being crushed in the process. The two then finally made it safely to the moat that guarded the city gates, and without hesitation, our protag wrapped his arm around his companion's waist and leaped across the gap, a feat that left all the soldiers jaw-dropped. At that moment, the troops' spirits lifted, reassured by the presence of the young mage who had already proven himself far above the ordinary. One by one, his S-rank companions also arrived, celebrating the fact that the monsters had retreated. Lloyd gave the credit to Claire, but when Yui and Silica heard the name, they were confused because they swore the girl's name was Kureha. But even so, there was no time to think about it, as the golems had yet to arrive, and the main support mage at the trench was already completely exhausted after such a fierce fight. Despite the exhaustion, he knew he had to stay on his feet and keep fighting, as the future of this city depended on it. At that moment, the guild branch director appeared to lend a hand, and Lloyd asked him to protect Claire during the battle. The man immediately ordered a squad of knights to guard the Beast Girl. Before she left, the mage thanked her, admitting that without her help, the outcome would have been much worse. However, she shook her head, saying it was the other way around, as they were the ones who saved her. The guild director declared that Lloyd was the city's only hope, a statement that made the boy uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Lena explained that the imbecile Alan had chickened out and refused to join the war, mentioning that after brawling with some adventurers at the guild, he simply abandoned his duty. Lloyd pointed out that thousands of lives were at stake, but Lena scoffed, saying that man was no hero at all. At that, Lena faltered, clutching a deep wound in her abdomen, and our protag, although he was running on fumes, still managed to heal her completely. But the effort left him so weak that he almost collapsed, and she had to hold him up. She told him that, thanks to his support magic, their party had always been the strongest, and even if Lloyd himself couldn't see how powerful he truly was, she admitted that she had never realized just how vital he had been to their group, and that she feels guilty for not stopping the others from kicking him out. With tears in her eyes, she apologized, but even so, Mr. Self-Esteem Below Zero still believed he'd been expelled for being too weak. But before they could talk more, the golems finally reached the moat. The soldiers at the front charged in recklessly, and Lloyd tried to warn them that those weren't ordinary golems. However, it was too late. Several warriors leaped into battle only to be slaughtered instantly. Seeing this, Lena raised her shield and ordered volleys of fireballs, but just like the arrows before them, the blasts barely scratched the monster's stone armor. One after another, the golems pushed across the moat, forcing the defenders back step by step. Even on the verge of collapse, our boy Lloyd prepared to buff the troops. His allies pointed out there were dozens of soldiers, but he assured them he could handle it if they were in rotating groups, quickly. He then applied physical enchantments on the frontline fighters while boosting the magical unit's firepower. His own party members also received enhancements, though everyone knew the effects wouldn't last long. Meanwhile, Yui climbed onto a wooden platform to rally the soldiers, shouting that Lloyd had strengthened several warriors who could now face the golems head-on. The troops still doubted they could stand against such giants until Lena proved it herself. Bracing her shield, she stopped a giant's fist dead in its tracks. To prove the point once and for all, Yui vaulted onto a golem and split it in half with a single sword strike. Lena reminded everyone that this was only possible because of Lloyd's magic, and slowly the soldiers began to realize their bodies felt lighter. In the midst of the chaos, Lloyd gave orders. Cross was to back up the magic units, while Dagaeus was tasked with protecting Silica so she could bombard the front lines safely. As for Lloyd himself, he could barely stay standing, so the guild director carried him to a safer spot from which he could continue to provide support. From then on, the archers worked hand in hand with the mages, unleashing blazing arrows that proved effective against the golems. At the front, Dagaeus planted his massive shield before Silica, giving her the protection she needed to rain devastating spells on the enemy. After a long stretch of brutal fighting, the defenders finally whittled the enemy down to a single golem. To end the war once and for all, a soldier charged in and struck with his sword, but the blade shattered on impact and the man was crushed by a single punch. This could only mean one thing: Lloyd's enhancements had just worn off. Panic swept through the troops and they began fleeing in terror. The last golem advanced, reaching the gates. Yui placed herself in its path, but Lena shoved her aside to save her life. Dagaeus was up next, shield raised to block the strike, but the sheer weight of the impact sent him crashing to the ground. In a final move, faced with his lack of power, Lloyd manages to enchant Yui's weapon. Realizing this, she calls upon the support of Dagaeus's and Lena's shields. With the sword in hand, the young swordwoman waits for the golem to throw another punch, and when the blow is absorbed by the shields, she takes advantage of the enemy's lowered guard to deliver the strike that would end the battle. Watching the fight from afar, the mysterious mage mutters to himself that Lloyd seems to thrive much more on a real battlefield than he ever did with his group of adventurers. Meanwhile, the great General Grist storms into Michelle's mansion in a fury, determined to announce that his enemies have rescued the Beast Woman. But Michelle isn't there, which makes the demon so pissed that he splits his host's table in half. With his plans crumbling, Grist begins to suspect Michelle's interference and decides to turn against his former ally. Sometime later, Lloyd wakes up in the inn's bed while Yui is sitting by his side tending to him. The mage laments not being strong enough to endure the entire fight, but she reminds him that he is far greater and more cherished than he believes. Outside his room, dozens of townspeople are crowded at the door, hoping for a glimpse of the battle's hero. All this attention makes Lloyd so uncomfortable that he slams the door in their faces, because if there's one thing worse in him than his self-esteem, it's definitely his shyness. Yui opens the door and tells him to step out with his head high. And he does leave, but through the window, stealthily, and scurries away like a rat. The scene changes, and far away, the mage who was following Lloyd's steps arrives at a small cottage. The moment he tries to open the door, an explosion greets him. Where Lloyd's former master had cast a spell the instant she sensed something suspicious nearby, demanding to know how he survived the blast. But like any good magician, he never reveals his secrets. Inside, he comes face to face with old acquaintances, Lily and Thor. Lily greets him as the legendary alchemist since he abandoned potion making to focus entirely on gathering information. Lloyd's master admits she hasn't seen him in years and asks about her former apprentice. He explains that the boy was kicked out of the heroes' party, but reassures her there's nothing to worry about, as he has now joined a rank S group. More than that, he has very important news about the young support mage. We then return to our protag, where after fleeing the crowd, Lloyd is cornered by his teammates who demand to know why he's running from everyone. They explain that no one is chasing him to invite him to dinner, it's just the townspeople's way of showing gratitude, since he saved the city. True to his insecure nature, Lloyd insists he only gave a little assistance in the war. However, his friends make it crystal clear they need to stop setting such impossible standards for himself because it's only tormenting him. We then return to the cottage. The alchemist confides that Lloyd has no idea how truly capable he is, and this is a damned blind spot that could harm not only his own well-being, but also his relationships. Saddened, Lloyd's master admits she would hate to think her student might repeat the same mistakes she once made. We go back to our protags group, now in the central square of Ishtar, where Yui persuades Lloyd to appear before the people. Immediately, the crowd raises their mugs and fists, cheering for the savior of the city. Lloyd in turn insists they should thank the warriors who fought so bravely. However, these same soldiers step forward, declaring they could never have fought without the unwavering support of the great mage. With no room left to argue, Lloyd is crowned, at least in the people's hearts, as the great hero of Ishtar. Not long after, Alan, the imbecile, heard the news that his former teammate, whom he himself treated like trash, was being hailed for carrying the city's army on his back during the battle. As expected, he was anything but happy, especially since his own title of hero is about to be revoked after refusing to help in the fight. With no patience for the situation, the party leader orders his subordinates to pack their things. They are leaving the city. After all, this place now sees Lloyd as the guy, and he can't stand to stay there another day dealing with it. Back in the forest cottage, the alchemist explains that Lloyd's new group is formed of elite adventurers, including a 17-year-old swordswoman who is a true prodigy. As the conversation unfolds, a glass of drink is served for each member at the table. The alchemist raises his glass, honored to drink alongside such a legendary group, but Lily cuts him off, telling him to stop with the formalities, as according to Thor, today is the day they honor Sybil. After a brief silence, the alchemist reveals that the demon race has been controlling monsters to conquer Ishtar, and the worrying question is, why are the demons acting now? It almost seems like the Demon King has returned. At this, Lloyd's master snaps, declaring that monster was exterminated long ago. There's no chance of his return. Otherwise, everything Sybil achieved would be for nothing. Thor calms her, pointing out that the possibility is slim. To protect the future Sybil created, they must give everything they have right now. Back in the city, the Rank S adventurers are summoned by the young lord of Ishtar. Upon entering his mansion, they are surprised to find Claire waiting inside. Only then do they discover that the Beast Woman has been welcomed as a guest of honor by the lord of this land. Finally, the young man introduces himself properly, Lord Abel Lucas. Cross admitted that at first, he thought the guy was the gardener or the butler of the house. Not even the rest of the team believed this boy was really the one in charge of everything.
Perplexed, Abel Lucas asked if he didn't look older, and Silica replied that he didn't even seem older than they were. According to the Lord, keeping up appearances requires effort. Yui muttered that this seemed like much more than just effort. When Lloyd remembered that his master also looked unusually young, he and Yui began to suspect it might be some kind of beautification magic. Meanwhile, on the staircase of a castle in another kingdom, a beastman despaired over finding no clue about Claire's whereabouts. Suddenly, a guard came running, calling for Celion, saying that the young Miss Claire had finally been found. At that exact moment, Lloyd and his companions were shocked to discover that Claire was none other than the second princess of the Forest Empire, a peaceful nation where the beast folk live peacefully. Abel Lucas then asked what they thought of the beast woman's magic, to which Lloyd admitted it was impressive, but also terrifying. Abel agreed that her power was truly unique, and that was exactly why they could never allow the demons to capture her. In the end, it was these adventurers who saved the princess. Speaking of which, Abel Lucas revealed a mission worthy of heroes like them. The Empire would certainly try to reclaim Claire, but the Lord of Ishtar wanted the group to escort her safely to Silphus, the capital of the Kingdom of Fulin. The group hesitated, pointing out that escorting someone of such importance seemed more like a task for royal knights than for simple adventurers. However, Lord Abel explained that sending knights would draw too much attention, and he feared the demons would immediately realize that such a critical piece was being moved across the board. For that reason, Claire herself insisted on entrusting her safety to the adventurers before her. Once the meeting was over, everyone gathered outside to prepare for departure. Claire asked them to call her simply by her name, and Yui, however, took off her glove and offered the beast woman a friendly handshake, giving the others the confidence they needed to relax in her presence. With that, Lloyd declared it was time to head for the royal capital.
Our adventurers then stop to take a break on their journey and reflect that they've been on the road for 10 days. This is happening because they took a longer, but at least much safer route. As a consequence, they're still quite far from their destination. That's when Lloyd suggested they stop in the next town to rest a bit. Yui, by the way, commented to Claire that the hot springs there were wonderful, to which the beast woman admitted she'd never had the chance to enjoy one. Cross commented to the others that Yui seemed a bit too relaxed about the whole situation, but Doggus argued that she was probably just being considerate toward the princess, making sure Claire didn't feel left out. Besides, as Celica pointed out, Claire grew up in a royal family and never had the chance to experience the outside world. Yui was perhaps the perfect person to introduce her to new things. The scene then changed, and we see they've gone to the hot springs. And on the women's side, I can guarantee you that nothing useful to the plot was mentioned. Just pure, unadulterated fan service and some talk about more or less respect and more or less developed bodies. And don't be fooled, because on the men's side, there was also nothing worth saving, where the guys were basically washing each other's backs. Lloyd, lost in thought, almost scrubbed his colleague's back right off due to the force he put into it, and with Cross's screams for Lloyd not to go so hard on him, moving on. The scene changes, and after this moment of pure uselessness, the group gathered to discuss the rest of the trip. Lloyd suggested staying in town for a few more days to sort out some loose ends, and Doggus thought it was perfect since he needed to buy new gear, considering his current shield to even be considered wrecked would need to improve a bit. Celica also loved the idea since she hadn't had time to practice her magic properly, so she could catch up on that. The next day, Doggus went looking for a decent shop, and after many failures, he ended up bumping into Yui and Claire on a boat ride. The princess recommended he check out a small, shabby-looking shop she had noticed. And well, with nothing to lose, the shield bearer tried his luck and was shocked by the quality of the items inside, wondering why the shop seemed so stagnant even with such good equipment. Just then, an old man appeared, asking what he wanted, and when Doggus gave the famous "just looking," he just authorized the tank to look at the equipment and left. At that moment, a bunch of scumbags entered the establishment, and from now on we can understand why the shop isn't doing well, as it seems they were harassing the owner. Enraged, the shopkeeper came out to kick the thugs out, but the leader confronted him and scoffed. Curious, Doggus asked if they were loan sharks, but they proudly denied it. Instead, the leader revealed himself as Ganon, the strongest, most perfect, and humble adventurer in the region. Showing a total of 0 surprise, Doggus simply assumed the guy must be famous. Garen explained with a grin that the stubborn old man refused to sell him one of the legendary relics of Rionis. The shopkeeper replied that he would only hand over that piece of equipment to someone who truly deserved it. And this answer got the intruder pissed, while Doggus, who had been calm until now, suddenly got irritated by such a pathetic threat. The man's mere gesture of revolt got the Garen henchmen ready for a brawl. The bald guy there then decided to do the honors and attack Doggus. However, our boy, the tanker, simply did what he does best, which is tanking the attack with enormous ease, twisting the guy's wrist and bringing him to the ground.
At that moment, Doggus then pulled out his shield using the storage technique, and since the enemies had no idea what that was, they thought it was some kind of high-level witchcraft. With no time to react, the entire group was sent flying out of the shop with a single well-placed shield bash. Garen, who apparently has trouble understanding things, wondered how a weakling like that was doing so much, to which Doggus decided to pull rank and show he's anything but weak, flashing his golden insignia that indicates he's an S rank, leaving nothing for the beta. The shopkeeper asked why he hid it, and Doggus shrugged, saying it's not cool to show off because of rank. As a result, the gang tucked their tails between their legs and fled the scene. After all the trouble, the old man, realizing the value of the adventurer before him, decided to give Doggus a unique opportunity, but with one condition. With that, the scene changes, and we see that Lloyd was working on his own skills. Besides polishing his basic support spells, the white mage was eager to learn new offensive magic just like Silica. The only problem is that, according to our pro tag, if we were to compare their fire magic, while he's capable of lighting a match, she's capable of setting an entire forest on fire. And I don't even know if we can believe Lloyd that much with his non-existent self-esteem, but moving on. Let's go then to Silica, who is alone in the forest, thinking how the last war would have been a disaster without our pro tag's crucial buffs. With this thought in mind, the young sorceress promises herself she will get stronger. Soon, while compressing a fireball, the sphere explodes prematurely and almost barbecues the girl. But not even that makes her give up. After all, no one masters a high-level fire spell overnight. Returning then to Lloyd, Claire, and Yui, the swordswoman points out that Silica is a true prodigy, and that what she most admires in her friend is her determination, mentioning that no one is better than her at that. Yui then narrates some past events, specifically as to when she met Silica as a child, where she was in an open field trying to hit a sign with fire magic, but her aim was catastrophically bad. Still, she never gave up. In other words, besides being talented, she was also hardworking. And it is exactly this determination mixed with talent that allows her, at that very moment, to create her newest spell, which caused an explosion so big it even changed the local ecosystem. After performing such a feat, Silica is soaked while wondering why she has to be so clumsy. Suddenly, a sound comes from the forest. Fearing it's a monster, she prepares herself. But it's just Doggus, who now has to explain why he appeared out of nowhere. Earlier, the shopkeeper had explained that he would grant him a shield forged by an extraordinary blacksmith named Rionis. Its name is Aegis, made from the world's toughest materials, capable of withstanding any type of attack. In short, Aegis is a legendary and indestructible shield. The old man believed that Doggus was the right guy for it. Still, the merchant would only hand over Aegis if he helped with one thing: solving the mystery of the explosions near the forest lake. Hearing the story, Silica felt offended by being mistaken for a demon. Doggus, on the other hand, thought the comparison made sense. After all, she did obliterate an entire lake along with its fauna and flora. After solving the mystery, Doggus reported back to the shopkeeper with his companion at his side. Fortunately, the sorceress managed to restore the lake's waters with her magic. Doggus apologized for his partner's screw-up, but the old man insisted the boy had nothing to apologize for. On the contrary, as promised, the merchant handed over the shield thanks to his honesty and capability. The scene changed, and now the group is all reunited, and Doggus summons the shield to show his friends. Everyone is enchanted with their companion's new acquisition, and Yui couldn't help but feel proud that Silica had mastered such an important spell. Brimming with excitement, she asked to see it live, and the mage agreed, mentioning they need to do it the right way, as this magic is quite dangerous. Seeing how incredible his friends were, Lloyd refused to be left behind, swearing he would do his best to stand by his companions, while Cross complained about the pressure everyone was putting on this journey. In response, Yui, showing that she's a great leader, mentioned that it's important for everyone to dedicate themselves, but without biting off more than they can chew. In other words, one thing at a time. Her words left everyone speechless until she reminded them of the most important lesson of all: an empty sack can't stand upright. With that, she invited Claire to check out a promising-looking restaurant, to which Cross, unimpressed, grumbled that their so-called leader was just being lazy again.
A few days later, the archer starts to feel even more pressure to improve, especially since Doggus and Silica are making great progress, and he simply can't afford to fall behind. Suddenly, a boy in a rush gets distracted and trips into the archer. He, showing concern, helps the boy up and notices his adventurer's tag. As soon as the boy confirms that Cross is also an adventurer, he invites him to form a party. Regardless of the answer, the boy drags the S-rank to the guild, which, to Cross's surprise, is much smaller than the one in Ishtar, although it's lively. The boy, clearly nervous, apologizes for bothering him, but Cross thinks to himself that there was no way he could refuse after the kid made that abandoned puppy face. He soon learns the boy's name is Lin and asks if he shouldn't already be in a party. The kid lowers his head, while a few other adventurers mock him for teaming up with the so-called Eternal Rank E and assume Cross must be some clueless rookie. Listening to the conversation, Cross begins to understand Lin's reputation in that guilt. For his part, Lin admits he's a failure and a burden, but the experienced archer tries to reassure him, saying their ranks are actually quite similar. This little lie lifts Lin's spirits just enough to make him feel like he isn't a complete nobody, and with that, the two set out on a mission. The scene changed, and we see that the leader of the group is super busy with tourism in the city, dying to try every sweet in sight, but afraid to gain a few extra pounds as a consequence. However, she's interrupted by a commotion happening nearby and observes a rich lady in the plaza accusing a poor boy of dirtying her dress. The child can barely speak from sheer terror, but the woman doesn't care and orders her servant to make the boy pay with his life. Some onlookers think someone should intervene, but everyone knows she's from the Windy clan, a noble family that no one in their right mind would want to cross. But Yui couldn't care less and jumps in front to stop the man from striking the boy. Furious, the noble demands to know how this girl dares to stand in her way, pulling rank with the classic "Do you know who you're talking to?" With a smirk, Yui admits she doesn't know exactly, but she's pretty sure it's just a lady who's way too old to be picking fights with kids on the street. And this obviously sends the noble completely over the edge, and she orders her guards to teach the pink-haired brat a lesson. Yui, however, tells the boy to run for it, and then blocks all 3 sword strikes with a single move. And while all hell was breaking loose with the leader of Lloyd's group, we return to the archers, who finally locate the nest of red slimes they were tasked with eliminating. Without wasting time, Cross pulls his bow from storage and nocks an arrow. He fires the first arrow into a slime's core and then drops the second creature. He encourages Lin not to just stand there and to join in. Lin draws his bowstring and releases a shot, but the force is pathetic and the aim is even worse, a complete disaster. Nearly in tears, the boy apologizes, while Cross realizes this partnership is going to be anything but easy. We then return to Yui, who, despite everything, remains calm. She even taunts her opponents, saying that everyone already knows who's going to win, so they might as well give up. However, the noble isn't leaving. Her fury only grows. Little does she know that some of the onlookers have already recognized Yui as the adventurer who reached S rank at such a young age. Even so, Windy has a card up her sleeve, and with a subtle signal, a hidden mage steps forward and conjures a magic circle under Yui's feet. Chains erupt from the spot, binding her body. According to the noble, these chains gradually drain the victim's stamina and mana. And indeed, even as an S rank, Yui can't break free. Windy watches with a smile, but just as her guards advance again, a hooded woman appears. She doesn't claim the right to decide who should or shouldn't fight, but she points out that 4 against 1 is cowardice. The shrew screams at her to get out of the way, but in that instant, the hooded figure moves with immense speed, and in the blink of an eye, she puts the 3 guards to sleep, disables the mage, and shatters Yui's chains. The lady couldn't believe her escort was defeated so easily. That being the case, the hooded woman stepped forward and asked how she'd like to feel the truth on her own skin, and this sent her to the ground. With the matter settled, Yui thanked the stranger for saving her. The woman, showing humility, admitted she only got involved because she was looking for something. Yui couldn't help but ask how she could become as strong as her, but the hooded woman simply told her not to rush. At that moment, Yui confessed that in her group there was an incredible white mage named Lloyd, and she often felt too dependent on him. That's why she needed to get stronger. The moment the woman recognized that name, she removed her hood and invited Yui to train with her. And speaking of Lloyd, the mage was practically frying his brain trying to keep up with all the spells he promised to improve. His companions, worried, went to check on him, but he reassured them. Dagas suggested he take a break, but our protag insisted he didn't have time for it. But then Claire forced the issue, saying she would go with him and all. And well, that's when our protag gave in. The scene changed, and we see that Yui is in the middle of the forest with the person who invited her to train. When she asks for her name, she replies that it's Lilith. However, the way she said it made Yui suspect it was a fake name. Even so, she felt she could trust her, and with that, Lilith declared it was time to begin the training. And since this anime is loving telling its plots and paces, the scene changed once more, and now we go to Claire and Lloyd, who were sharing a pastry. Lloyd thanked her for the company, and she mentioned his magic research, saying it must be exhausting and that she wished she could help. Hearing this, Lloyd asked if the Beast Woman's magic was an ancestral spell, and this question left her thoughtful. Guess what? That's right, my dudes. The scene changed again, and now we go to Cross and Lynn, who were training. At that moment, the S-rank archer gave the kids some tips, and after that, he managed to hit a slime for the first time. In other words, he started to progress. Cross then asks him to try and hit the core, and after achieving such a feat, he was there all happy, feeling accomplished. We now return to Lilith, who is instructing Yui to try and cut down a tree without moving. Yui frowned, but then her companion swung her sword, sending a magical strike that reached the tree and split it in half. According to the warrior, she had channeled magic through her blade. If she could learn that, Yui realized she would finally have a way to deal with long-range attacks. During this time, Claire revealed to Lloyd that she was in fact the heir of an ancestral magic, just as he suspected. He asked if it would be possible for him to wield such magic, which could help him progress his research. Claire, however, feared it was impossible. Ancestral magic, she explained, was a gift granted once a century randomly. Anyone else who tried to use it would suffer divine punishment. In fact, she said there was a story of a person who died the moment they tried to use it. Hearing her concern, Lloyd promised not to bring up the subject anymore. Back on the training grounds, Lynn's eye was improved, and together they managed to take down all the slimes. Cross joked that now he just needed to learn how to fire arrows in rapid fire succession. Lynn's jaw almost dropped until Cross laughed and said he was just kidding. But as they were about to head back, they were surprised by the appearance of a Luna Magra, a hideous, high-level monster. Cross fires an arrow straight into the creature's eye, but even that part of its body seemed as hard as stone. He points out that to take down an enemy of this level, he'll need a powerful chain of attacks. Lynn remembers the sequential shot Cross mentioned, but the man laughs, repeating that it was just a joke. But the boy suddenly has an idea. And with that, Cross then begins to summon his arrows directly from his storage magic. And with this rapid-fire sequence, he manages to put enough pressure on the spider's eye to burst the organ, splitting the monster's skull and piercing its brain, finishing the creature off. With the mission a complete success, Lynn and Cross return to the guild not only with the slime's magic cores, but with the carcass of the Luna Magra. Seeing what the duo had accomplished, the adventurers around them are left dumbfounded before bursting into applause for Comrade's achievement. The boy, shyly, asks if it's okay for him to take the credit since Cross did most of the work. But Cross is just grateful he learned something new from the kid. Still, Lynn apologizes for all the trouble he caused, but the archer tells him to go easy on himself since he's always apologizing for everything. Grateful for the support, Lynn asks if Cross is actually much stronger than he says. At this, Cross sighs, apologizing for deceiving the boy, and reveals his S-rank tag, which only sends the poor kid into even bigger panic. Meanwhile, Yui was practicing non-stop, but kept failing. Frustration set in, especially when Lilith admitted it should have been easy. Excessively tense, Yui forces herself to concentrate, but the truth is, the thing is absurdly difficult. Impressed by her determination, Lilith asks why Yui so badly wants to become stronger. The girl confesses that when she became S-rank, she thought she was above everyone, but after meeting Lloyd, she realized there's always someone stronger. Now she wants to grow enough to proudly say she can fight side by side with the white mage. Suddenly, a massive cat that was lurking in the shadows pounces on Lilith. In a panic, Yui reacts and unleashes the very magic she had been struggling with all this time and cleaves the beast in two. As if nothing had happened, Lilith merely praises Yui for finally pulling it off. The words bring a smile to Yui's face, though she quickly loses it as exhaustion takes over. That night, the rest of the group grows worried over Yui's long absence, until they hear a noise at the door. Opening it, they find her sleeping soundly on the doorstep like a child, while Lilith is already gone, her hood over her head. The next morning, it's time for the team to finally depart. Lloyd laments that he seems to be the only one who hasn't made any progress. Well, except for optimizing his spells, learning new group combat magic, and even creating a new tracking skill. The others exchange glances, grumbling about how this idiot always acts like nothing he does is enough. Meanwhile, Lily returns to Lloyd's master, complaining about having to use a fake name just to check up on her disciple. Merlin snaps, furious that Lily is the only one having fun, and decides to go see the boy herself.
Sometime later, Merlin finally reached the capital and was dazzled by its beauty and constant motion. Far away, in a dark castle, Grist was reporting to his master, who revealed himself through a blue flame. His voice carried disappointment, as his subordinate had failed to wipe out a small countryside town. This failure also gnawed at the demon from the inside. The flame demanded to know what happened to the beast woman, but Grist had no idea where she had gone, and this answer only deepened the master's discontent. After the master chewed him out, Grist wandered the city streets, boiling with frustration. The weight of his responsibility was greater than ever, especially since he had no idea where to begin searching for Claire. That was when Michelle appeared, offering a little hand, and the Beelzebub went crazy with his presence there. After all, he had betrayed him some time ago. However, Michelle calmly explained that he had acted that way only because he also didn't get the agreed-upon cash. But, however, and nevertheless, he had million-dollar information. Claire was on her way to the royal capital, but not under the watch of common soldiers, but rather by S-rank adventurers. Suspicious, Grist demanded to know how Michelle had such information, and he simply replied that he was desperate to clear his name. Helping the general recover the beast woman was his chance at redemption. Grist obviously despised him, but with no other alternative, he reluctantly accepted the help. The scene changed, and we now go to our protags group, where we see that their teamwork was growing stronger by the day, with them joking and interacting with each other. However, they hear a noise in the bushes and become alert, only to discover it was just a rabbit. Since it's better to be safe than sorry, and our protag aims for that too, he took the opportunity to use his detection magic, reassuring the group that there were no demons nearby. The white mage, however, pointed out something curious. When the rabbit startled them, they all sensed something at the exact same time. Yui then asked Lloyd what he had felt. He admitted he did what he could, but still felt very insecure. Yui smiled, teasing him about his bad habit of selling himself short. Claire also joined the conversation, saying he had more talent than anyone she knew. Cross agreed, admitting that it showed him how much he still had to grow, while Dagus observed that since Lloyd had joined, they all realized how much they would come to rely on their white mage if they stood still. Yui concluded that true confidence meant understanding one's own real strength, and our protag, taking their words to heart, promised to try to be more confident. At that exact moment, Merlin was before the gates of the royal castle, only to be stopped by two guards. With a gesture, she cast a spell that messed with the soldiers' heads, and they obediently stepped aside. She strolled to the palace corridors, searching for a specific chamber. Eventually, she reached the library, where her eyes noticed something unusual. The room itself was an illusion. Facing one of the walls, she released a spell that revealed a hidden door. Before she could knock, a young beast woman named Rian appeared from within, recognized her instantly, and pulled her inside. They hadn't seen each other since the war against the Demon King. Inside that secret chamber, Rian revealed that the one ruling the Sorcerer Kingdom now is none other than the Demon King's son. Merlin was surprised to find her friend's secret laboratory inside the royal castle itself. Still, she had come for something serious. Producing a grimoire, she asked Rian to investigate if at least half of its power to seal the Demon King still remained. As improbable as it seemed, there was always a chance he could return. Back to the S-rank adventurers, the group was studying the map. They were close now, but night was falling, and Claire expressed her concern as traveling at night meant running more risks. Speaking of which, Cross wonders if the princess's own creature enchantment wouldn't be enough to prevent that, but she explains that it might not work in time if they were caught by surprise. So Lloyd expands his detection field, but feels an interference in his magic. Suddenly, everyone senses the arrival of a thick fog. Silica tries to summon her staff from storage magic to push it back, but nothing happens. Lloyd quickly assumes the fog is interfering with their magical power, and with that in mind, they dash through the forest, desperate to escape. Worse than anything, if a demon was behind this, it could only mean an ambush, and so they run straight for the city of Schwartz. Meanwhile, Rian studies the grimoire and confirms that the magical power still remains within it. Merlin interprets it as the last will of the legendary mage who passed away. Rian doesn't understand,
So the human reminds her of young Lloyd, the child she took in and trained. One day, by chance, Lloyd touched the grimoire and revealed himself to be compatible with it. That's when the master realized the child carried enough power to be chosen, just like her and Sybil before him. The problem was that she treated raising a child the same way she would craft a spell, ignoring the boy's feelings most of the time, and that became her greatest regret. Back to the White Mage, Lloyd and his companions finally reached Schwartz, but the city is also swallowed by the same suffocating fog. The streets are empty, so Lloyd casts an enhancement spell on Silica, allowing her to summon her staff and clear the fog with a wind field. The trick works, revealing figures that were hidden. The great General Grist and several of his men ready to attack. Claire immediately recognizes her assailant. The general makes it clear that the Beast Woman still has her uses and orders his troops to capture the princess once more. Lloyd reacts quickly, strengthening the abilities of all his allies. He instructs Daggis to protect Claire while Cross climbs one of the towers for a better vantage point. Finally, Yui conjures her sword and unleashes a new long-range technique she had just mastered. Lloyd warns Silica not to use her explosion spell, worried that it might kill innocent civilians. So she switches to Fireball. But as soon as the weaker enemies were dispatched and he aimed at Grist, the general revealed a hide tougher than steel. The demon marched straight toward the group unfazed. This gave Grist the opening to get close to Claire, but Daggis was ready. He blocked the crushing blow with his shield. Yui took the moment to attack from behind, but her blade stopped, intercepted by Grist's defenses, and she was thrown back. Lloyd realized the truth. Grist was protected by a magical armor. His sharp insight made the demon suspect that he was the so-called hero of Istar. With that thought, Grist leaped to attack, but Silica responded instantly with an explosion. Taking advantage of the enemy being airborne, a colossal blast tore through the air, but even that wasn't enough to hurt him. Grist remained untouched. To make matters worse, more of his subordinates appeared. But then, out of nowhere, a wave of ice swept across the battlefield, freezing Grist's men in place and forming a protective barrier around the adventurers. From the top of a roof, Celion orchestrated the attack. Observing from afar, Michel realized that things were not going well. At that moment, the partner of the legendary alchemist Merlin appeared. As he himself said, he was there to cut evil at its root. Meanwhile, Celion approached the adventurers, calling them a bunch of weaklings. Claire explains that this foul mouth before them is the hero of the ice crystals. Yui instantly remembers that this so-called hero isn't exactly famous for his good behavior. By the way, Claire notices that he's carrying a bag she made for him as a childhood birthday present. This little detail gives Yui the perfect chance to tease him. Meanwhile, Grist breaks free from the ice and returns to the fight. Arrogant as always, the hero of the ice crystals orders the adventurers to stay out of his way, and immediately tries to freeze the enemy general's feet. Grist notices something unusual. His opponent doesn't need incantations. Explaining that he was born with resistance to that element, Celion cuts the conversation short and goes for a brutal strike. Yui and Silica offer to help, but the Beastman insists they stay out of the fight. At the same time, Michel thought he had already defeated the alchemist, only to realize that he had grossly underestimated him. Back in the city, Celion bombards Grist with an obscene amount of ice while cursing him every which way. Yui understands why this man isn't accepted as a hero, and Daggis adds that he causes so much chaos that it's simply impossible to fight alongside him. Lloyd, on the other hand, focuses on something else: the fact that Grist still hasn't struck back. It doesn't take long for him to realize that Demon had been gathering magical power, preparing to unleash a single devastating blow. Realizing what's about to happen, the S-rank adventurers hurry to protect themselves until Grist and Celion collide, fist to fist in midair, releasing a massive explosion. Taking advantage of the distraction, Michel seizes the chance and flees from the battle. In the center of the explosion, Lloyd pushes away the debris and smiles upon seeing Daggis still alive. Using his detection magic, he confirms that all his allies are safe, except he can't sense Claire or Celion. And then, in the midst of the chaos, the princess appears, already in the clutches of the great General Grist. He then escapes aboard an allied flying vessel that shows up just to rescue him.
Celion, desperate, projects his astral eyes to try and reach Claire, but the energy around the ship is so intense that they shatter before even getting close. Seeing his friend losing control, Lloyd calls for calm, assuring him he has a plan. But Celion, spitting the words with disdain, refuses to work with him. Lloyd's friends, seeing that his stubbornness would only make things worse, tell him to stop acting recklessly, reminding him that he could never reach the ship alone. Lloyd insists they need his power, and Celion, reluctantly and gritting his teeth, agrees, but warns him not to get in the way. Meanwhile, aboard the ship, Michelle reveals with a mad scientist's air that the vessel is a mobile lab. Grist, impatient, wonders why he didn't use it sooner, and Michelle explains that it's just a prototype powered by a pulsating fragment of the Demon King's body, which he can use to create an infinite energy source, and that he's already experimenting on several monsters, excited about the fortune he's going to make. Suddenly, the alarm sounds. Celion and the others are approaching at high speed. And how? We discovered the genius of the plan. Celion is creating ice platforms in the air, one after another, while Lloyd uses reverse gravity magic to sustain them, creating a makeshift bridge to the ship. The team storms the deck, and Grist, furious, rushes to face them. Lloyd, with a swift motion, buffs his friends with support magic, their auras glowing. Grist charges with the fury of a bull, but Celion, with feline agility, dodges by a hair's breadth and already twists his body for a swift counterattack. Grist boasts that they'll never break his impenetrable shield. Silica surrounds him with her acid fog, which corrodes the deck but has no effect on his armor. Even attacking with everything they have, Grist's overwhelming power still manages to dominate them. He tries to crush Celion, but Dagus, with a cry of effort, throws himself in front, the sound of the impact echoing through the air. And as Grist prepares to strike again, his hand suddenly freezes, covered in a layer of ice, and shatters into 1,000 pieces. Celion explains that he used his cold energy, and Lloyd, with a strategist's smile, reveals he used a spell to block Grist's pain perception. He figured out that the general's mana armor only works against attacks he can see, a weakness he noticed when Grist's hair froze in a previous attack from Celion. Realizing he's been completely tricked, Grist runs back to the lab and tells Michelle to release the monsters. Celion arrives with the others and demands Claire back. Grist, desperate, sets the creatures free, but a giant snake wraps around him and he screams for help. The monsters have gone berserk. Michelle, with his mad scientist's grin, finds all of this a perfect field test and uses a device that emits a strange sound, calming the creatures. Celion seizes the chance, rushes to Claire's side, and sets her free. Grist is furious, but Michelle says the experiment isn't over and turns the monsters on Lloyd's party. But Claire, now free, uses her ancient magic and sings an ethereal song that calms the monsters again. Michelle, fascinated, thinks about recording their reactions, but the ship suddenly begins to shake violently. Claire's magic made the Demon King's fragment go berserk. Worried about an explosion that could disintegrate them all, Michelle removes the fragment as a power source, but the ship, now powerless, begins to fall from the sky. Yui braces for impact, but realizes they are floating gently, untouched by the chaos, as Lloyd had already activated his gravity magic. Suddenly, Grist's body begins to contort, and he screams at Michelle to give him the life source. Michelle, theorizing that the Demon King might be looking for a vessel, throws the fragment at Grist, who is instantly consumed by a mass of pulsing darkness. The darkness absorbs the surrounding monsters, fusing them into Grist's body. A hideous, multi-formed creature emerges, and Lloyd recognizes it, a chimera. Michelle, marveling at his creation, barely has time to say incredible before he is cut in half by it. As the brawl rages on, the scene cuts to Merlin, who meets with the alchemist William in the castle. He reveals that he used a potion to put the guards to sleep, and Merlin, knowing he wouldn't break in for no reason, takes him to a private room. Back on the crashing ship, Lloyd buffs Dagus, who blocks a brutal attack from the Chimera, but his arms are shaking and he warns that he can't hold out much longer. The Chimera blocks the only exit. Celion prepares to fight to the death, but Claire, with tears in her eyes, stops him, not wanting him to hurt the monsters that make up the creature. Yui and Cross attack, but the Chimera protects itself with the barrier of wind and flames. The ship is about to hit the ground, and Lloyd, desperate, knows they won't make it out alive.
Silica tries to blast a path with her wind magic, but the Chimera easily counters it. That's when Lloyd has a genius idea. He tells everyone to run to one side of the lab and cancels his gravity magic. With all the weight on one side, the ship violently tilts. The Chimera, unable to keep its footing, slides out of the way, clearing the path. Everyone takes the chance to jump from the falling ship. Celion creates an ice platform in the air, and Silica, with the last-second buff from Lloyd, uses her magic to slow their fall, allowing them to land at the last moment. She thanks Lloyd, who, with his usual modesty, thinks he didn't do much.
Celion, panting, reflects that he's always fought alone, thinking that relying on others was for the weak. But after seeing Lloyd and the gang in action, he starts to change his opinion. The ship smashes into the ground, causing a gigantic explosion. Claire feels bad for the monster, but it emerges from the flames even stronger. Lloyd tells everyone to run for the forest. That's when Merlin and William suddenly appear, and she uses her search magic to find Lloyd. Everyone wonders how the Chimera is so strong. Lloyd remembers Michelle mentioning that it resonated with Claire's ancient magic. Celion thinks they will need to kill it, but seeing Claire's reaction, Silica wonders if there's anything they can do to save the monsters. Lloyd then suggests the risky plan: have Claire sing again to channel her wish to save the monsters directly into their life sources. He believes that if he amplifies her power with his own magic, it might be enough to reverse the transformation. Claire agrees, but as they prepare, Merlin appears and stops them, telling him with an authoritative voice not to mess with ancient magic. Lloyd insists it will work. She reminds him not to be overconfident, but he replies that thanks to his friends, he has finally realized what he can do. They head off to face the Chimera, and Merlin, with her heart in her throat, hopes that since he is only supporting Claire's magic, the tragedy won't repeat itself. While Celion distracts the Chimera with ice walls, Lloyd manages to jump onto it and gives Claire the signal. She begins to sing. He amplifies her magic and the plan starts to work. The monsters begin to separate from the Chimera's body, but a sinister black void opens up above Lloyd and sucks him in. He finds himself in an infinite white space. An ancient voice tells him that his body and spirit are separating. Outside, the others also hear the voice. It's Sybil. He explains that ancient magic belonged to a superior past human civilization, but they created magic so powerful that it plunged the world into chaos and led to their own ruin. Terrified, they prohibited its use, but prepared an inheritor, and they cast a spell that would destroy any non-inheritor who used ancient magic. Sybil reveals he broke that rule himself at the cost of his own life to bring everyone back after the Demon King's self-destruction.
The space begins to close, but Sybil tells Lloyd that he still has a chance. He hears the voices of his friends, calling him back. He follows them and suddenly appears behind them. And two comments. First, for the whole anime, I thought they were the same person, but they're not. And second, our protag was unironically saved by the power of friendship. Anyway, moving on. Everyone is relieved and Merlin thanks Sybil. Yui can't believe that Lloyd's master is the legendary Great Sage Merlin. Claire thanks everyone, and they end up being rewarded by the king with a mansion to do their work. At that moment, a beast woman shows up and starts sniffing our boy Lloyd, and our protag doesn't even know where this crazy lady came from. She mentions that she's sniffing him because he has the same scent as Merlin, his master. The master then appears and says that her name is Rion, that they are friends, and that she can distinguish the scent of magical power. Rion continues and explains that their scents are different, but that their way of controlling and using it are identical. And Lloyd, hearing this, has no idea what she's talking about, but everyone goes silent, and he finds it strange, asking if a bug bit them or what. And Yui explains that, well, he's being compared to the fucking Great Sage Merlin, so obviously they're shocked. Besides, they question why the clueless guy there kept his mouth shut and never told them he was the pupil of one of the strongest people in this world. And he didn't even answer that, probably because he didn't even know this stuff. If there's one person who knows nothing, it's our boy Lloyd. Merlin then asks what he's going to do from now on, if he's going back home or something like that, but he says no, because he wants to continue with his friends. Besides his own will, there's the fact that the king asked them to stay there a little longer, and that he's going to take advantage of this journey to further hone his magic. Rion gets close to him once more, and says that he's really very similar to her master, but when he remembers how much he suffered at the hands of this crazy woman, he just reflects that he still hasn't decided if this comparison is a compliment or a threat. And this obviously makes Merlin go Joker mode in her head. The scene changes and we see that Merlin is talking with Will, apologizing for giving him so much work, but he mentioned that for a person like her, all the effort is worth it. She says, however, that the threat of the Demon King has not completely disappeared, so they might need our boy Lloyd's power in the future, something that Will agrees with. And with that, they just continue their journey. In another scene change, we see our group of adventurers in front of the colossal mansion they were given, mentioning that their lives did a fucked up 180 after Lloyd joined the group, as they saved Ishtar and even messed with ancestral magic. They mention how strong he is, but he says that's not quite it and that he's lacking the tatakai and stuff. And with that, both the episode and the season of this anime end, and if you've made it to this comment, know that I thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the support you've given to the channel and for your participation making this journey even better. Like the recap? Then leave your like and your hype to support the video. And subscribe and hit the bell because that way you won't miss any news.